Economic uncertainty, migration, ethnic nationalism, and the narrative of a strong leader. These are all characteristics that can be found in several European countries today. In recent years, populism, especially on the right of the political spectrum, has gained support in many European countries. Some European countries, such as Poland and Hungary, have strong right-wing populist parties in power. Since the Italian elections in September of this year, Italy can be counted as such a country. Therefore, this episode, we will take a look at populism and especially its implication on minorities. We will discuss its role in Italy, its history in the 20th century, and its return in recent years. Because this topic is so interesting and we could discuss it for hours, we narrowed it down to how minorities, and especially LGBTQ+ people, are affected by it. We invited some of our Italian friends to get better insight and to discuss how their lives have been affected by these elections. Firstly, we must discuss what populism actually is. Populism is often associated with dictatorships or right-wing politics. However, it can exist on both the left and the right side of the political spectrum and can also exist in democracies. The focus of populism is on the relationship between the leader and their people, often leading to a cult of personality. Populist politicians appeal to emotions of their voters and often utilize a strong rhetoric. So populists usually succeed by appealing to the wishes of those who feel marginalized and disadvantaged by society. Therefore, populism can be seen as an amplifier of the concern of the voiceless, as well as the force of democratization. The emotions associated with populism create a unifying feel-good factor through mass mobilization, which works through pitting the real people against the other, which is called othering. However, as mentioned, the focus and power remains on one leader, and populists often use the tactic of othering, thus hurting minorities and furthering gender and class division. So to sum it up, features of populism include clear gender roles and hypermasculinity, the creating of an of-the-people complex, so also using exclusion as a form of pressure, one charismatic leader who is the savior who helps the angry and alienated and overlooked people, as well as a very down-to-earth rhetoric, which invokes strong emotional responses. In essence, populists feed on fear, needs and anger of those who feel excluded. As mentioned, in recent years, right-wing populism in Europe has progressed through combining xenophobia with charismatic leadership. We can witness this trend with examining the news. In the news, we often hear politicians talking about the real people versus the foreigner, which is of course an example of othering. As well, there is a frequent use of hateful language and discriminatory rhetoric. Thus, we can say that nowadays populism in European countries combines low level of actual violence with high level of rhetorical violence. As mentioned in the introduction, we will take a closer look at Italy's history with populism. Depending on which country one is from, one might have some idea of the history of populism in Italy. In my history program in Germany, however, populism in Italy was not really discussed much. However, especially looking at the results of the most recent elections in Italy, a look at Italy's history with populist parties is very interesting. If we discuss populism in Italy, one name comes to mind immediately: Benito Mussolini. He was a populist who coined the term fascism.
Before taking a closer look at Mussolini's fascist and populist policies, we have to discuss how populism came to be. Populism tends to be the byproduct of a particular socio and economic climate. The early 20th century proved to be the perfect breeding ground for such ideas, and thus, one cannot look at the rise of populism without accounting for the situation that led us there. After the First World War, many European countries found themselves in a bad economic and social situation.
Populist politicians took advantage of the people's perceived insecurities and promised to alleviate their fears with their policies. Thus, activist and fascist movement could be found in most European countries after the First World War. All had some common traits. First of all, they were anti-conservative, anti-democratic and anti-liberal.
They were revolutionaries who claimed that they wanted to make one's country great again after the humiliation suffered during and after World War I.
They were populists. Both Mussolini and Hitler believed that they represented the real people who were deceived by the lies of the elite, and the cult of personality was developed around them.
They were anti-capitalist and anti-communist.
Conceptually, fascist corporatism was supposed to represent a third way, characterized by unity, discipline and class cooperation. In practice, however, fascist economic policies served the interests of the big industries.
They glorified violence and considered violence to be a legitimate means of achieving political goals. Moreover, populist parties emphasized the importance of obedience. Although fascist movements could be found in many European countries, it was especially in Italy and Germany that parties inspired by this ideology succeeded in coming to power and realizing their goals and political programs.
It is crucial to note that while fascism usually is rooted in populism, starting with populism doesn't mean that you will end up with a fascist government. There's another important distinction between fascism and populism. Fascism is never democratic, while populism only undermines democracies, but doesn't really completely remove it. So we can conclude that Mussolini's party, the National Fascist Party, was populist in its beginning and evolved into a fascist party. So let's talk about the man that we mentioned already, Benito Mussolini. Mussolini was born on the 29th of July in 1883 in a small town in southern Italy. Mussolini was a self-described socialist, and until his expulsion from the party in 1914, due to his pro-war stance, he was part of the Socialist Party. Mussolini was increasingly convinced that a society should organize itself not along the lines of social class or political affiliation, but around a strong national identity, an idea that is typical for a populist leader. He believed that only a ruthless and energetic dictator could make a clean sweep of Italy and restore it to its national promise. Mussolini was convinced that he himself was the much-needed leader. He rose to power after the First World War, and like many other populist political movements, Mussolini's party gained popularity in Italy because he appealed to the emotions of his people. After the First World War, Italy found itself in a bad economic and social situation. To make matters worse, Italy felt betrayed by its allies due to the Treaty of Versailles. They felt that the treaty, which carved up the territory of the aggressor nations of World War I, disrespected Italy by awarding it far too little land. This mutilated victory would shape Italy's future. Mussolini used the overall discontent to gain more support, which is again typical for populist politicians. Similar to the right-wing movement in Germany, Mussolini was supported by many soldiers who were left without a job after the First World War. The fascist anti-communist militias were organized in the Squadrismo. This movement contributed to the growth of Mussolini's power in Italy through their brutal crackdown of political dissent. The most loyal paramilitary wing was known as the Black Shirts. Though in reality Mussolini only controlled a fraction of the militia members, the image helped to build up his reputation as a powerful leader capable of backing up his words with violent and decisive action. In conclusion, Mussolini, known as Il Duce, did not only exercise a powerful influence over Italians, seducing them with his personal charm and persuasive rhetoric, but also enforced his policy through violence and oppression of political opposition.
So how did he become the prime minister?
In 1921, Mussolini won a seat in the parliament and was even invited to join the coalition government by Italy's Prime Minister Giovanni Giolotti. Giolotti's goal was to constrain Mussolini's power and to lessen his support within Italy. However, this was a severe miscalculation. In October of 1922, Mussolini seized power with a tactic remembered as the March on Rome. Mussolini's fascist paramilitaries gathered outside of Rome, and Mussolini used the group as a leverage to pressure the prime minister to give him power, as well as to push King Victor Emmanuel III to recognize Mussolini's authority. With that, Mussolini intended to intimidate the government into submission, and his tactic worked. When Mussolini stayed in Milan, his supporters scattered. They left cows in their wake, taking over government buildings and towns as they passed through en route to Rome. The prime minister attempted to impose martial law, but the king thought Mussolini could usher the instability and refused to sign the order that would have mobilized Italian troops against the fascists. Thus, on October 30th, Mussolini became the prime minister of Italy. Over the years, Mussolini increased his own power by chipping away at the population's civil rights and forming a propagandistic police state. He fostered a cult of personality, projecting himself as an all-present and strong leader. His government expelled all opposition, including socialist members, and arrested all communist members of parliament. He also abolished local elections and reinstated the death penalty for political crime. However, Mussolini's agenda went beyond domestic affairs. Mussolini's imperial ambitions led to Italy occupying the Greek island of Corfu, led to Italy invading Ethiopia, and led to Italy ally itself with Nazi Germany, eventually resulting in the murder of over 7,000 Italian Jews in the Holocaust.
So, Georgia, how did Mussolini affect people living in Italy at the time, specifically minorities?
That's a really good question. Thank you, Eva. Similar to what was happening in many other European countries, the minority of Jewish Italians were targeted. Although Italy was ruled by a fascist government since 1922, anti-Semitism was not initially part of the platform of Mussolini's party. However, Italy, moving closer to Germany and the creation of the Rome-Berlin axis, intensified the process of discrimination. As of 1935, the press increasingly began to spread anti-Semitic propaganda, and from 1938 onwards, the Italian and German government began directly assaulting the Italian Jewish community. From 1938 to 1943, the Italian government, led by Mussolini, also imposed a series of laws, which were called leggi razziali, that excluded Jews from schools and armed forces, restricted Jewish ownership of certain companies and property, as well as prohibited intermarriages. Moreover, in February 1940, Mussolini announced that within 5 years Italy would rid itself of the Jews. The most violent part of this assault took place between 1943 and 1945, when German occupation forces, with significant help of the Italian government, deported and killed over 7,000 Jewish Italians.
Thank you, Georgia. That was very insightful. Next to religious minorities, were LGBTQ+ people also targeted?
As mentioned, populist politicians often utilize othering and the tactic of scapegoating. Thus, populist governments often discriminate against minorities such as the LGBTQ+ community. During the reign of Mussolini, no discriminatory laws were passed, but the climate was created in which open manifestation of homosexuality could be suppressed. In essence, the fascist government preferred to deny the existence of homosexuality in general. This was due to the fact that Mussolini was emphasizing the superiority of the Italian people. Italian fascists were trying to restore the traditional patriarchal gender hierarchy, emphasizing the warrior-like masculinity of the Italian male. Thus, homosexuality was considered a weakness which had negative implications on the whole of society. So, gay men were basically undermining the image that the dictator wanted to project of the Italian manhood. Basically, it was impossible that homosexuality could exist within a fascist regime, so the strategy was to cover up the issue as much as possible. However, the government also punished homosexual behavior with administrative punishments such as public warnings and confinement. Gay people were prosecuted in the later years of the regime. Thus, gay men were also imprisoned in some part of Italy. For instance, a number of gay men were imprisoned along with political prisoners on small islands such as Lampedusa. As mentioned, Italy is currently experiencing a new wave of right-wing populism. Thus, we thought it might be interesting to take a closer look at how the political climate is today.
In the recent September elections, which had the lowest recorded voter turnout since the establishment of the Italian Republic, Meloni's party received 26% of the vote. This meant that she joined with the other right-wing parties to form a coalition which consisted of Forza Italia, Berlusconi's party, North League and Us Moderates, with a combined number of 237 seats out of the possible 400. In 2018, the leftist populist party 5 Star won the election, which shows a growing trend in Italy towards populism, which did not start with Meloni and cannot be defined by its connection with the right. Over the past 10 years, voter trends have become increasingly populist. People became disenfranchised with the government on issues such as deindustrialisation, high unemployment in the south, and high poverty rates, all of which reached a pinnacle in 2022 following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which led to an energy crisis across Europe which is still affecting us today. Voters came to the conclusion that what had come before had not worked, and Meloni won an onslaught of support from her grand promises with vague applications, allowing her to appeal to a wider demographic. Since her appointment as leader of the party in 2014, she has strived to reform the Brothers of Italy. This is clearly shown by the election results, with the Brothers of Italy securing just 4% of the vote in 2018. It is a dramatic leap to 26% in 2022. Meloni joined the youth movement as a teenager and has been an ardent supporter of the right ever since. Meloni characterised herself as a mother, a Christian and a woman. She pushes herself as a guardian of Christian family values and return to traditional beliefs. This in turn leads to the genesis of her views on abortion, the rights of LGBTQ+ people to get married and or adopt, and her attitude towards immigrants. The party ran with the slogan, "Ready to revive Italy," cementing its traditional views of Italy and Italian values. A traditional family is what the motherland was founded on, according to their electoral programme. Her cabinet has also come under fire recently, with photos surfacing of her Deputy Infrastructure Minister wearing a Nazi armband with a swastika on it from 2005. The party's co-founder, La Russa, was filmed in 2018 exhibiting fascist photos, medals and a statue of Mussolini. He is currently the Speaker of the Upper House of Parliament. One of the first acts of the Parliament was to crack down on illegal raves, which are now penalised and could result in hefty fines and prison sentences of up to 6 years. The issue here is that legislation could slowly chip away at the right to hold demonstrations, something which could have adverse effects in the future. According to Meloni and other sources, it is unlikely that existing legislation granting civil unions to homosexual couples and abortion rights will be revoked. Instead, any proposed liberal legislation on issues such as these will not move further. However, this does not alleviate all fears. Any discrimination based on any grounds such as sex or sexual orientation is prohibited by Article 21 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. However, multiple countries within the EU have passed discriminatory laws against LGBTQ+ people. Many of them are governed by right-wing populist parties. Thus, the recent political developments in Italy must be examined. The Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has used anti-LGBTQ+ rhetoric in her speeches and has argued for emphasising traditional gender and family norms, putting the rights of LGBTQ+ people into question. In a speech given in 2022, Meloni stated, "Yes to the natural family, no to the LGBT lobby. Yes to sexual identity, no to gender ideology. No to Islamist violence, yes to secure borders. No to mass migration, no to big international finance. No to the bureaucrats of Brussels." 41% of LGBTQ+ people in Italy say that prejudice and intolerance has risen. As recently as October, gay rights activists protest a rally that Meloni was holding in Sardinia. The protester urged for the right to be married and raise a family in the country of his birth. Meloni retorted, "You want a lot of things. Everyone wants things. You already have civil unions." Currently, Italy bans IVF for homosexual couples, while surrogacy has an outright prohibition. Meloni has sought to criminalise gay couples who go abroad to seek surrogacy services. However, it is not exclusively bad news for LGBTQ plus people in Italy, as over this summer there were strong indicators to show that Meloni's views are not consistent with that of the Italian people. In June, an IPSOS poll showed that 63% of Italians backed marriage rights for gay people, up 15 points from 2013, and 59% were in favour of gay adoptions, an increase of 17% from 9 years ago. Statistically, LGBTQ plus people in Italy do not feel more discriminated against than the EU average. However, we must be vigilant to ensure that the hateful rhetoric that Meloni is frequently using does not pave the way for furthermore discrimination against LGBTQ plus people. Now we're handing the mic over to Elena to talk to our Italian friends and hear their views on today's topic.
Okay, for the purpose of the second part of this episode, which will put the focus on personal experiences rather than just basic facts, I am very happy to welcome our Italian representatives to our podcast. Welcome Mick, Edoardo, and Enrico. Before we proceed, could you please share a sentence or two about who you are, where in Italy are you from, north, south, let's see what we have, what you study or what are you interested in, and what comes to mind if I mention Italian politics or why this is perhaps an important topic.
Hi guys, and thank you for having us. I'm Enrico, I'm 20 and I come from the northeastern part of Italy, more precisely Pordenone, which is a relatively small town close to Venice. So I'm studying international and EU law here at the University of Groningen. And well, I'm very interested in Italian politics, especially in this current climate. Well, I think it's quite going to be interesting to discuss it as, in my opinion, it looks quite a bit scary right now.
Hi, I'm Mick. I'm from Milan. I'm a law student as well. I have a few reasons why I'm interested in Italian politics because they affect a lot of aspects of who I am as an Italian citizen. And my family is originally immigrants. My father comes from Iraq and Egypt, and I am also a queer woman and Jewish. So yeah, a lot of things to think about with the new government.
And I am Edoardo, third year business economics student. Yeah, I'm interested in politics in general, particularly in Italy because it's my country. And I'm from Florence, so it's center of Italy.
Thank you so much for coming, guys. As Eva and Georgia started their part, so the first part of this episode, by explaining what populism is, I would first like to ask a couple of questions on that, if that is okay. Now, it is oftentimes said that populism feasts on fear and annoyance of the public. So basically, the public thinks that the people who are in power right now are not doing anything or are not elevating our current status. Do you think this could be true for Italy, in your opinion? Are the Italians, you guys also, fed up with the status quo and that perhaps voting in favor of far-right parties, such as Meloni's party, would actually be just to change something, to change the current climate?
I think that personally what happened in Italy in the last decade can be kind of respective of what you just said about populism, in a sense that many of the votes that made the previous main party in the government, so the five-star movement, be in government, came from Italians being fed up with the status quo and with a lot of decades of corruption in the government and in institutions, which led to them voting for this new rising anti-status quo party. And during the years in which they were in government, so from 2018 to around this year, with the COVID crisis and with the economic crisis, the situation of many Italian people worsened from an economic standpoint. And as a consequence, the only party that stayed in the opposition throughout these years was Meloni's party. So the shift of the Italian malcontent of the population probably shifted from this former anti-establishment party to Meloni's and her coalition. So that's, I think, what kind of happened.
I actually agree with most of the things that he said. But the fact is that Italian politicians have not done a lot or barely anything. They've kind of managed to coast by and not make things necessarily that much worse. But that is not great because Italy was not in an amazing situation to begin with. And in Italy, as we became a more desirable country in a way to live in, to build a life in, we've had more immigrants, more outside influence, which in a country like Italy that didn't solve any of the fundamental issues that we had, just meant that we also became more prone to blame the issues that were mostly already there on the new affluence of people. So the big rhetoric that a lot of far-right or right-wing politicians have, and in Meloni's party we can see that as well, just managed to shift all the blame onto them, not really collect any of it. For the established parties, they already had been doing nothing. So yeah, I think a lot of people were very dissatisfied with that.
And also I believe like during the campaign, well, she was really, really good at speaking, public speaking, and also in the media. She was, well, sending her message clear and loud, and also she made very explicit jokes, sometimes even funny. And same with like the right wing in general. Berlusconi also is a master, of course, of media campaign. And this, of course, benefited because, well, it's the people that are going to vote you, and not everyone is reading every single text or what you're saying. Like maybe they're watching TikTok. TikTok for the first time has been big in this campaign. And, well, if you see a Meloni video and you see a Letta video, you will see a big difference. One is ready to send a quick message, clear, and the other one, it's kind of lecturing you and, of course, plays a difference.
Yeah, I also think all three of them are very polarizing characters in general. Berlusconi, Salvini, and Meloni, which made up the coalition. They all made their personality and just themselves such a strong symbol of what they believe in, what their party stands for. Like, even if you disagree with all of these people, everybody in Italy knows their name, knows more or less their character, at least what they portray their character to be. So yeah, they're definitely very, very charismatic.
Seeing that you're all young Italians, question is, do you guys use TikTok?
I personally don't.
I do.
I don't, but I went to see only for the campaign what they were doing.
Okay.
And I think, like, Berlusconi made an incredible joke. One of the funniest that I've ever heard. Yes, it was genius joke.
Please explain the joke.
Like, basically, it was this joke about people being on a plane, and the people were the Pope, an assistant of the Pope, Joe Biden, Putin, and himself. Yeah, that joke is genius. And he was like, this plane is crashing. There are only 4 parachutes, or like 5, so one is missing. And they are arguing on this plane who has to catch it, you know? Putin says, I'm the most powerful man in the Europe and Asia area, so I should get it. And Biden says, I'm the most powerful politician in the world, so I should get it. And Berlusconi says, well, I'm the most powerful man in Italy, so I should get it. Then the Pope and the assistants are left, and the Pope says, oh, but I'm old, you know, like, you should get it. And the assistant said, oh no, there's no way I do this, blah, blah. They keep arguing. And at some point, Berlusconi grabs and jumps out of the plane, right? And everyone is shocked. Berlusconi jumped without the parachute. That's the joke. So he's like making fun of himself, but also portraying like this idea that he's great and he's a great politician, blah, blah, blah. This is not exactly the joke, but this is how it goes. And I think it's genius because like you're not taking yourself too seriously. You're showing empathy to the young people. And like you're also playing with your character, which is a huge media character in Italy. Yeah.
If we go directly to Mick, just to ask, because you are the one that actually uses TikTok most out of the three of you, did you come across, I'm guessing For You is Italian For You page, how often during the voting season did you come across a very politically inspired video or a propaganda?
So the thing is, of course, TikTok has an algorithm, which means it mostly just showed me my views that I had already established. So I can't say that like from their parties, I had a lot of content. What I did get was a lot of remixes of their speeches, often to the sound of music. And unfortunately for me and every other Italian on TikTok, they are the most catchy thing I have ever heard. And I have been singing them for the past several months. My housemates have been singing this in Italian. I don't know if you know the speech, Io sono Georgia. It's also in Spanish. It comes with a series of arrangements. I hate it and love it at the same time. But yeah, like a lot of these, that's what I was talking about before. Like even if I don't agree with them, I know exactly what they are. I know what was in the speech, one way or the other. I may sing it to the sound of Macarena, but the point is that I know every word. So yeah, the fact is that they're funny. And by being funny, they're shared almost everywhere. Like my views are very different from them. TikTok never shows me right-wing stuff because it's designed not to. And I still ended up seeing them, so I know for a fact everybody else has to.
Do you find it concerning or scary that TikTok and the watering down of politics was such a big thing in this election and that it became buzzwords, it became songs? Do you find that concerning?
I think it kind of is because it kind of ties with what we were discussing before about populism being mostly about feeding the fears of the population, not about actual facts or actual issues that are occurring. Because obviously through TikTok, as you guys mentioned, like you can pitch your messages which are strong and which are funny and which can be reposted by everyone else. But actually, yeah, like from my perspective, this political campaign also in the news was mostly portrayed as focused on the single individuals and what people were saying or criticizing about them rather than on ideas and on the problems that there are actually in Italy.
On this, the entire left-wing campaign was, let's avoid populism and right-wing. Why should I vote for someone that its only idea that it's portraying in the campaign, it's do not vote the right-wing? Like, what's your point? It's not a strong point. Also, we have 4, 5, 6 parties on the left. Who am I going to vote? Because you all are saying the same. And that was a problem for sure.
You all mentioned the big images that some of the politicians portrayed. Berlusconi, Salvini, Meloni, they all had this cult of a personality. Basically, they built on the fact that they were a politician with an image, right? Which is actually something that Eva and Georgia mentioned in the beginning, the fact that in populism, you have this central figure that kind of brings and ties everything together. Do you think that, because we're on the topic of the recent elections, do you think Meloni is one of those people? Do you think that in Italian media, not perhaps just TikTok, because it's a bit more geared towards young people, but also if you look at the news, if you read a newspaper, or if you come across somebody that reads a newspaper, do you think that Meloni is portrayed like that, as a savior of the people? Maybe very extravagantly said, but does she have that big of a cult in different media?
I don't think we're at that stage yet, in a sense that the main topic of the news is centered towards her. As well, she's now the prime minister and is the first female in the prime minister position. So also news outlets that are anti-government and that are mostly left-sided generally are always talking about her. She is the main protagonist of the Italian scene, that is without any discussion. But I don't think it's yet to a point of being, a cult of personality, or at least not to what we could assume of general populist leaders are. But it is going in that direction.
Exactly. If there is someone in the Italian politics scene that can do that, it's for sure her. Because, for example, I basically agree with 0% of what she says. And still, I respect her a lot because of what she has done, what she has achieved. She's also the first woman, and you have to respect that, especially given that she's right-wing. Because if there is a part of politics that it's inherently masculine, that's for sure the right wing. And if you take that she has a fascist past, that's even bigger. And as I already said in intro, I perceive her as someone smart, which I don't, for example, Salvini. And I think most Italians don't, because something that other politicians, and this is also for the left wing, and it's a criticism that I hope it's constructive for them, they are contradicting themselves. And everyone has done this, like Letta has done it, Conte has done it, Renzi has done it, Calenda also recently has done it. But also Salvini has done it. And this is why he went from 30% to around 10% during this election. Meloni so far has never done it. And as we will see maybe later, now she's doing, but in a smart way. When she contradicts herself, it's always with a duality.
In contradicting, do you mean contradicting in statements or contradicting in what she says versus what she does? What do you mean by that?
The latter. So what she says, what she does, since she has been in power, are not always aligned. But because the policies she's doing with her team, and also some smaller policies or like things that she's saying in the media. Example, the policies that she's doing on energy is the same that was with Draghi. So nothing has changed. And this is something that can upset your voters because you're saying, I'm going to change so much, we want to do nuclears and stuff like that. And now you're changing nothing. And it's been approved for the next year that the plan is exactly the same. But also what you're doing is, for example, doing a law against raves, which are for your voters, like the identity of your party, to do like fight on drugs and those people that don't want to do anything. They don't want to work. Italians don't want to work. We have to go back to uni. They don't have to party, stuff like this. This is something that also she's doing. This is smart because you're doing something for your voters that it's small, because rave is a very niche. But on energy, which is huge and can have a huge relevant impact on your country, you're aligned with the previous government. And this is, I think, very smart.
I totally agree with you, and I think it shows even more how this duality of hers with an ideological implantation on the national field differentiated with her tones in the international setting, because, well, in her campaign and generally in her previous policies when she was at the opposition, she was very much anti-European Union, anti-Atlantism, and generally not very much looking forward to international cooperation, such as with countries, for example, such as France. And now that she is in government, she has to cooperate with those institutions and with those countries. So we're seeing that also her attitude has shifted to a more moderate attitude and to live up to the standards that, for example, the EU asks her. So in that sense, what Edoardo mentioned about her ideological implantation in national law and in smaller laws that she makes just in order to make her voters happy, whereas the big deals and the big issues that she was also arguing in the international setting are not really going to be tackled.
Do you also have something to say, Mick, just on the fact that she made quite a lot of statements on women's reproductive rights, right? As part of her campaign. Has it changed towards now, fast forward to now when she has been elected?
Yes, she has made a statement in which she said that she wasn't actually going to change the law that regulates abortion and abortion rights in Italy. But again, she refuted in a very vague way, which is not necessarily threatening, but as she is a threatening person, then yeah, it is. Basically, what she said is that she's not going to touch the law, not revoke it or change it in any significant way, but she is going to give women more options, which probably is going to go into funding for anti-abortion initiatives or companies or yeah. So the problem is that obviously she can't do it right now. She probably doesn't have enough support. It would be a very long thing. A lot of people would be unhappy with it, but it doesn't mean that she can't do it in the future. And since, I mean, it was said also before, I also think she's a very smart woman. She's definitely going to get to a point in which she can do it. And I think what she said about giving more options is vague enough that she definitely shows the initiative to do it.
I have one last question on topic. To you as a woman, how do you feel like, as Edoardo pointed out, she is the first female Prime Minister of Italy? How do you feel about that? I can see from your face or expression, but can you please describe to us?
So she has said quite notoriously that she has won this presidency for all women. I would like to state that she did not. I cannot express enough that this woman has done anything in her power to make a worse situation of what is already not ideal a situation in Italy. She has no respect for what women have done and what women have struggled for a very long time in Italy, in the world in general. I do not even want to start thinking about what she could say as an intersectional feminist. She says she's a feminist. I have no idea what she thinks that word means. I do not like it very much, no.
I think in that sense it's also quite interesting to notice it really doesn't, it's not a matter of policy, it's not nothing that shows anything about her policies towards women's rights, but she chose in all her official communications to be addressed as well as the Italian article, that is the male version of the article. So instead of la presidente, it's gonna be il presidente. So although it's not really relevant as a matter of substantive wise, I think it quite shows her attitude towards, well, women's rights and generally women being in roles of power.
Yeah, on this could also be seen from the campaign already, because the day of the vote, she was holding two melons, like boobs, because that's how we refer to boobs in Italy, but the way she was holding them alludes at testicles, not balls. Like that was the sign of how she was holding them. It was like from down, like this. And I think that was also very smart. Like, yes, I'm a woman, but I also have the values, like the attributes. That was the message. And well, it worked.
Just going back to what Edoardo was saying about raves, and so do you think that the typical Maloney voter is affected by this legislation with raves? Like, who votes for Maloney?
Well, aside from the considerations upon the new legislation restricting raves, which, well, yeah, are not really that relevant, I do think that this just shows her policy towards her voters, which are generally old people in the population, maybe only predominantly males. And, well, as that instance was done just to feed her worries about the youth going on parties and just doing drugs. So generally her voters are mainly from the old age part of the population, as she herself admits. And as she shows from also actions, one of the two first measures of the new government were to raise the pensions. And as well as she said in several of her speeches, actually two of her speeches, not several, that she knows that young people will go in on protests against her, and that she is compassionate towards young people because she also herself, when she was young, protested against it. So she's aware of this and she knows it, and she purposefully directs her policies at old people.
When she was young at 15, she was an activist for the fascist party, so perhaps not the same. But yeah, I do agree with everything else he said, actually, but also because I think it was very smart. I mean, the majority of the people that are going to be affected by this legislation were not going to vote for her in the first place. She hasn't realistically lost anything. Although it is kind of like a point, I don't want to say pointless, but not that relevant legislation. The fact is that she's made people happy and she hasn't lost anything doing it, so...
Do you think that her voters and her campaigns were to give people more rights or to take rights away from other sections of society?
The thing is that, but yeah, rights are not quantifiable. So there is no such thing as like the people that voted for her have all the rights. I mean, no particularly discriminated minority in society was gonna go and vote for her. So maybe they felt like they needed more rights or their rights were being taken away from them. But the fact is that all she can actually do is take those rights away from people that were already struggling. She cannot give more rights to people who already hold the majority of the privilege in Italy.
I think it depends on what you mean by minorities. Because, for example, I believe that for the poor, and this is like 20% of Italian population, which is really high, by the way, this program will actually be pretty good and it will improve probably because of pensions, because of they are decreasing taxes, they are giving funds. There is this card that you can use to buy goods, for example. This has been designed and it's in the process of design. And they are doing quite a few things. But if you then talk to immigrants, to even young people, if you're talking about women, if you're talking about minorities inside, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, probably not. But so far, I think the differences has been in how this has been talked. Nothing has been changed in the laws, or very little, but it's more how people have like discourses, you know, like public discourses has shifted a bit. And in this sense, for example, we had a little problem, let's say, with ships from ONGs with immigrants that were blocked in the ports. And unfortunately, and this is not good, this is standard in Italy. Like it happens all the time. The difference is that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs this time said there is no way they're gonna disembark here. So you have to leave. And of course, this is not a law. It was like a special thing, like only this time this is happening. And well, it had a backlash on a European level. Many countries like France, Denmark, Sweden entered the discussion and said, you will disembark these people. There has been a few days of panic, and then these people actually disembarked. Let's not remember that we are talking about children, women, sick people that were basically almost dying on these ships. So it's a sensitive topic. But the difference between normal, like standard, and this time is that this time, instead of being quiet, it was voluntarily raised and said, we are not going to do this, because then the voters will say, oh, see, Meloni now is there and she's doing this, blah, blah, blah. In the end, nothing happened because these people disembarked. But for the voters, this is something. So it's more on the public discourse. And in the future, for sure, it will get worse. Like, this is my guess, right? Because it will not be good for minorities. It will not be good for young people. It will not be good for any vulnerable groups, for sure. Beside Italians or Venezuelans, as she said sometimes, because they are Italian, apparently. But this is my guess. Like, so far, no. Future, most likely, yes. As of now, it's like public discourse, the way we talk about it.
I completely agree with you, especially what you mentioned about the incident with the ships. What I think it's more scary is, as Edoardo mentioned, not what already is being done law-wise, so taking away rights from minorities, etc. Because obviously there are certain also constitutional protections that we have that, thank God, will not allow her to do such things, at least on a short notice. But what is really scary for me, at least, is how her and her coalition being in government and portraying such ideas legitimizes even more the population into discriminatory behaviors and into actually taking even more actions. So if also your government leans towards attitudes that are discriminatory towards the LGBTQI plus community, towards migrants, towards people coming from a different ethnic background, the population and the citizens are going to be, even on a more subtle level, more incentivized into taking these behaviors. And already Italy is not a, let's say, flourishing country in terms of being welcoming. We are one of the countries, according to ILGA Europe, with most violence against people in the LGBTQI plus community. Well, and the general public opinion towards people migrating towards Italy is definitely not as good as in other countries, such as, well, here in the Netherlands. So I am very scared, not much about what in the short term can be done by the government, but how the people will react towards this new settling.
That actually really connects with my second question, which would be about whether or not you feel worried about Meloni, as she has been using a lot of hatred-inspired or hatred-centered narratives in her speeches against minorities, such as you mentioned, the LGBTQ+, ethnic minorities, immigrants. Do you feel like her coming in power and also the whole electoral procedure kind of incentivized people? You've already mentioned a bit. From my personal view is I'm not Italian, so I didn't look at Italian politics every specific day. But even if I didn't, I could see, from my point of view, quite a lot of hate crimes coming about after she was elected. I think it was in the south of Italy towards an immigrant. And I could see that it was condemned, of course, in international media. Also probably because I'm a bit more central leftist and I read those kind of media. That's why it was condemned. But I could see quite a lot of hate crimes happening, and I mean the rise in numbers. So do you feel like that has anything to do with her, the way she speaks or what she believes in, her ideology? And is it one particular minority or are there several? What are your opinions on it?
I think the problem is not that her words have necessarily put these ideas into people's heads. Italy, I mean, they've said it also before, it's never been paradise or a safe haven for immigrants necessarily. I do think people feel more justified in what they think now. They can politicize it, they can cite reasons, whether they believe in the reasons or not, then it's up to them, but they will cite them for why their hatred is the way that it is. I don't know if this is gonna escalate and actually make Italy a more dangerous place to live than it was before, but I can definitely tell you that the opinions of people are long-term gonna change just because they don't need to hide it as strongly anymore. And I know that even if you're like, if you're a racist and you just hide it, it's still not ideal, but you come to appreciate it a lot once they don't have to hide it anymore. And especially, for example, I mean, the Jewish community in Rome just sent out a statement because there was they say not to call it a celebration, but I mean, they did throw a parade, so I don't know what else it was supposed to be. But on the anniversary of the first big mass deportation of Jewish people from Rome, and it was supposed to apparently celebrate just the strength of the Jewish people that made it through. I still think a parade was not perhaps the best way to go about it. And the Jewish community in Rome released a statement and they said it doesn't matter what they do, it doesn't matter what they say, we are not going to trust them. Which I feel reflects a lot of what these minorities think. I know that she's right now not, of course, gonna, admit new racial laws or anything. She's not gonna do that, but it's very obvious that she is gonna do something and there is cause for mistrust amongst these minorities.
In general, for the second part of the question, violence is pretty high in Italy, and not only towards immigrants, for example, but also very high on women. Like, we have a lot of issues with ex-boyfriends killing the ex-girlfriend, ex-wife, and etc. And in general, I'm not aware of the numbers, so I will not say if it's going up or down. But for sure, it has an effect. Like in this country, Netherlands, where I think the level of cultural awareness, it's really high. So since I came here, I learned so much about how not to offend people, how to be more aware of what can offend people and things like that. So I'm also more concerned of what I say and the way I say it. In Italy, I could say anything as a joke, because I don't mean it. But as a joke, I could say literally anything. And no one would say, oh, wait, but this is kind of offensive. And yeah, on the first question, I'm not super concerned as I was before elections, because Meloni didn't win, and Meloni and the coalition didn't win with 50.01%. If that happened, they could have changed literally any law, including constitution, without any opposition from other parties. And this is where I think for me it changed. Before I was really scared, because if this happened, I think they could select the people in the voting process so that they had no opposition and they would skip referendum to change the constitution, which is something we cannot do as of now. But still, she has a lot of power. So yeah, we have to look out a bit.
Yeah, I actually had a comment on what he said before about moving to another country and being way more aware. Like, that happened to me too, and I've never even considered, when I was in Italy, I was the person who was annoying because it would tell you not to say jokes and stuff like that. I moved to the States when I was 16. Let me tell you, it was not good. I have always been in life in a position to be discriminated for something or another. Most of the jokes were offensive to me personally. And I mean, obviously, my friends, I never even questioned that they meant it or not. A lot of the time, I would even let it slide. It never even occurred to me that it would be that big of a deal. And then I moved outside of Italy and I was like, oh, never mind. It's really different. And it's not even a question of more or less educated people. There's very highly educated people that I have had wonderful conversations with. And they will say things that now sometimes I go back, I listen to them, I'm like, oh my God, I hope for your personal health, you never say this outside of this country, because I don't know how that would go.
Going back to voting demographics, I just had a question because I pointed in the intro that we have 2 northern Italians and 1 central northern-ish Italian. Do you think there's also a divide between north and south in terms of who votes for whom?
Well, I looked at the statistics after the voting, after the election. I don't precisely remember it, but the differentiation was not as big as one would think. Voters from the south were mainly gravitating towards the Five-Star Movement, which was the populist party that was referring to before, that was in government throughout the last 5 years, but also the presence of Brothers of Italy, which is Meloni's party, and the general center-right coalition was also quite big in the south. So it's
if she didn't win, she was the second party everywhere. This is the data. And also something that struck me is that for the first time in so many years, the region where I'm from and region that is right up, so Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna, these are left regions. And a lot of people still vote the Communist Party. In this region, for the first time in I have no idea how many years, right-wing won, especially Meloni won in both. So this was a huge change for sure.
I mean, in Milan, I've kind of seen this since Milan is a very international city. It has a lot of people from different backgrounds. We also have a lot of people coming not only from other countries, but other areas of Italy to work or to live there or to study. So, I mean, I personally always thought it was a very mixed, multicultural city. And at the same time, it's, especially for Salvini and the North League, they've always had this ideal of separating Milan and like the region of Milan from the rest of Italy, which, I mean, obviously it wouldn't work. I don't know what the plan there exactly is, but the point is, yeah, it's a very weird place to live because the people you will meet on an everyday basis completely fine would never, I mean completely fine in the sense that they wouldn't vote for these people. I am aware that there are other perspectives in the world, but yeah, then you hear these politicians and they speak of Milan sometimes like it is this fortress of traditional values, and I mean we were French until like 200 years ago, man. I don't know what you want.
Enrico, you brought up Meloni's party of the Brothers of Italy, and I just wanted to touch on a point that when we were doing our research we came across some information that there's a politician who openly collects fascist memorabilia who's the elected Speaker of the upper house of Parliament. What's the general opinion of that in Italy, and what are the thoughts?
Well, yeah, it's the president of the Senate, La Russa. He was interviewed some years ago for Corriere della Sera, which is a national newspaper, and he showed the journalists that he has memorabilia of, well, statues of Mussolini and other fascist collections in his home. Well, I don't really know how to comment that. He's the second charge of our state.
So the reason I'm asking this question is because Georgia, who's not here today, she's German, and obviously if you look at European history, two major fascist countries historically would be Germany and Italy. And I'm going to speak for Georgia now because she's not here, but she was saying that would be absolutely unheard of in Germany. So due to the amount of education of how serious fascism was taken when they were in school. So I'm just wondering, what was your education like regarding fascism when you were in secondary school? I'd say in particular, probably not primary.
Yeah, brief comment on La Russa. This is one of the most loyal men for Meloni. So it was shocking, but to some extent, because he's been important. He's been in the party of Meloni since the party was born. He's been advising Meloni. So, you know, he's pretty important for the party. And again, that's ideology, because it's an important charge and he has some power, but it's not the most important thing for a state. He doesn't have really wording policies and stuff like that. On the second part, it's for sure because of our education, I think. The idea that we are good people, and also the idea that Mussolini wasn't really voted, he got power, and also the resistance, all these things, I think. We ourselves perceive a difference between Mussolini and Hitler and our great-grandparents and Germans that served under Hitler. Well, I perceive this difference myself. There might be some real difference, but let's not forget that most of our grandparents or great-grandparents were fascists, were born under fascist regime. They went to school during fascism and all those things. So yeah, matter of education for sure.
I absolutely also agree that our education is severely lacking and disappointing in that regard, in the sense that, of course, we talk about fascist history, we talk about how Mussolini got power, we talk about the coup, which is still called the coup, although it could have been avoided, but it wasn't. Okay, I also want to divide my answer in two parts, actually. First, I just want to talk about La Russa. There is absolutely no excuse. I have heard everything that people have to say about this guy, that it's historical, that it's important to his heritage. I do not care. I really do not. There is absolutely nothing you can say to me that will make that excusable, because you do not keep a bust of someone you despise in your house. You keep the bust of someone you admire in your house. You admire Mussolini, you admire everything he has done. I do not care about the swamps. I don't know if this is understandable to people outside of Italy. Do not care he drained the swamps. Could not care less. The trains were on time. Think about where the trains were going. That's it. That's all I have to say about this man. Moving on to the education system in Italy about fascism. So yeah, I think a big part of that is actually because we were brought into Western Europe very swiftly because the US were very afraid of the socialist presence that we had in Italy. So we kind of had to sweep everything under the rug because the consequences that Germany faced obviously made it very hard to then, I mean, not very hard, I wouldn't say, but they had to go through a process of paying reparations and owning up to their actions to then be considered kind of the center of Europe that they are now, you know, and their education education also focuses a lot on the genocide, which a lot of people agree was the worst part of World War II. In Italy, our education is not necessarily focused on that. It is focused on fascism, Mussolini, rise to power, the politics that went behind it. But we kind of gloss over the part that we really played in the genocide. The fact is that we actually deported a lot of Jewish people. And a lot of people also have claimed like, oh, well, Russia also did it. Well, Russia is also not a great country. So
I think I have a different view on this in a sense that it all depends also on, well, how, for example, your teachers or your school was brought up onto this topic. Because, for example, personally, I have not had this experience. I have an experience in which my teachers were always quite vocal about teaching us, well, what happened in the fascist period and why was Italy also at fault there. We did several also projects about it. Of course, it depends on the background and on the school and on the things that there happen. So I would say that, yeah, I agree with you on the general line, but I say that there are quite some differentiations as well that can then play within.
Yes, fascism is for sure condemned, but also, for example, I don't think that in Germany they study the art that has been produced during Nazis, and we do. Honestly, I like it a lot. I think it's a great movement. But you have to know that it's under fascism and still we appreciate what has been done. And we still have a lot of fascist art in Italy, which I really, really think it's good. But of course, the most explicit things have been deleted and that's really good. But I don't think that in Germany this is happening, you know. And I don't know, I'm not saying it's correct. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying there is a difference. And also something else, in Italy we have Liliana Segre, she survived the Holocaust and she has constant police under her. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And this doesn't mean that we don't punish fascism, we do, but maybe not as harshly as in Germany.
yeah, I actually also have a point on Liliana Segre. So there's this, I mean, the Central Station in Milan is actually one of the biggest examples of architecture during fascism. It is very beautiful, a bit creepy if you know the meaning, but very, very beautiful. And there is like a hidden, in a way, platform kind of under the station that we actually only recovered thanks to Liliana Segre showing where to look for it. And that was the platform where Jewish people were mostly taken away from Italy and then sent to concentration camps. So yeah, we actually did go on a field trip there with my school. So I would like to also amend my previous statement. We do learn about the effect that Italy had on the genocide. I think more in international views, we are not seen to be as linked to it.
Just to raise one last point about Liliana Segre, which I think is quite interesting. She, as mentioned before, is like one of the very last survivors of the Holocaust, at least I think probably maybe the only Italian one, I'm not aware. But she's a senator, and she was, by a fortunate coincidence, the oldest at the opening of the new legislature. So she got to preside the opening of the new legislature. And personally speaking, seeing her giving the seat of the president to, La Russa, that we discussed before, was quite disappointing. Not towards the Segre, obviously, towards the institutions.
Have you read the policy for the next year, like financial plan?
The budget
Yes.
law? Yeah, like I haven't read the law, I read the news.
Okay. What do you think of it?
I mean, like I think they didn't do anything exceptional because that's what mostly needed to be done. Like out of the 35 billion euros, 21 are for energy, which, I mean, fair. And I don't like how they planned out the Reddito of Cittadinanza.
Okay.
But
are you a fan of Reddito?
I'm not a fan. I am a fan of the principle. I'm not a fan of how it was being done. Like I think it should stay, but with a different approach.
Okay. So Reddito di Cittadinanza is a welfare system for those listening, and it was created by the Movimento 5 Stelle. Quick opinion, that's I think why in the south it got so many votes, because they wanted to keep them, of course. Since in 8 months' time it will no longer be implemented. What they are planning is that in this 8th month they will keep receiving money, and then apparently this is what the Ministry of Jobs or something like that said, is that they will design in the meantime a way that all the employable people will get a job, and they have to accept and they will get a job. And I think the main idea behind this was that, as you said, the way it was implemented, this welfare system, was a bit lacking. And a lot of people were laundering money or like not declaring that they were working and getting also the welfare system. Which means that, for example, people working in the mafia or, citizens not paying taxes would get money and also work aside of that. And of course, it's not good. I think this policy aims at decreasing this. So I'm not completely against, but it's dangerous because we already have 20% poverty line. And like if you're not effective in giving all the people that could work a job, then we will have huge troubles. But what I liked about what they wanted to do is that they defined employable people, which means that for a lot of categories, this does not affect them and they will keep receiving the welfare system. And I think this is at least good because it focuses on minority. And it's something I appreciated inside a lot of other things.
Personally speaking, I just think that this shows again the double standards of Meloni, as we were just talking before, because, for example, this citizenship income that they were discussing, it's actually a measure that, politically speaking, is meant to simply aid people who are out of work. And at least when it was implemented, there were a lot in Italy. Obviously, as Edoardo mentioned, there were many issues with the implementation, such as corruption, etc. But at least I believe that the idea behind it should be good and should stay. And this was actually one of her main points in the political campaign, of going against, obviously, the money that is being wasted and that the measure should be cancelled in its entirety. Turns out when she gets to government, they realize that it cannot immediately be cancelled in its entirety because people rely on it to actually live and move forward. So they made a plan to phase it out, but it's going to end in 2024 or something like that. Well, the details haven't been set out yet, but it just shows how, in the political campaign, she shows one side of hers, but then when she got into government, things actually are different than what people were claiming. So it's another instance of her populist attitude.
And also what I ask is it's hard because everyone has ideologies and she was the first to raise them. So of course we will be prevented towards her, but also let's try to see what she does, because we are a democracy. Somehow she's in power now. So some people voted her. Let's see what she does. And let's assess the work that she and her team are doing. And then at the end, let's draw lines. If I look, for example, at this very important document, I have a question about how are we going to pay what has been done? Because they are decreasing taxes to 15% for people earning, before it was 60K a year. Now it's 85 and they want to raise it to 100K in 2025. And they are increasing pensions. They are doing all these measures. How are we going to pay this? Because we are a country with 135% of GDP in debt. And it's really, really high. This is crisis in Greek levels of GDP to debt ratio. Who's going to pay? Because we are increasing a lot of expenses. And if you cut taxes, where are you getting your money? Because it's not like you can loan this money.
Yeah, we are gonna pay with our future jobs. No, aside from jokes, on that note, the European Commission just sent a letter 2 days ago saying that it's very worried about the Italian GDP public debt ratio, or public debt to GDP, sorry. And in fact, there were articles in the newspaper saying that the new budget law is probably not gonna be given a positive opinion by the European Commission, and that's quite worrying as well.
This is coming from a place of complete ignorance, but I'm just wondering, is Italy a beneficiary or a contributor to the EU? So then do they give more money or do they get more money? Because I know I'm from Ireland, I'm Irish, we used to get more money and now I think we're giving more money for the first time. So
I think that depends a lot. There's not a yes or no answer to this. There's too many funds and things that come in and out to really be given an answer. I have no idea of the data. But of the new plan that was implemented, which was quite a big deal in Italy, the Next Generation EU, which basically provides COVID relief, Italy is the main beneficiary from that.
My point was also about COVID. I know that during the worst of it, I think around March 2020, we were definitely a beneficiary. But we also had a lot of international aid, not necessarily from the EU. I think the biggest part definitely came from the EU, but we also had other countries sending aid to us. So I don't know how that factored in. We've definitely been on both sides of this before. I think we've switched around quite a lot, but we've been on both sides of this, and which is why a lot of people that voted for Meloni have very strong opinions against Europe or think that we should leave. I would love to ask them, then what are we gonna do? Who is gonna pay for literally anything at this point? Not even just the new plan, but we cannot afford anything, guys.
I suppose I was teasing out the point of this was Britain's kind of keystone, that they were giving more money. And I know that Italy exit, I know that it is a concept, and I'm sure, from looking at Meloni's policies, this would be something that we conceptualize. Now, I'm sure we're quite far away from that. I'm not trying to suggest that we are, but I just think it's quite interesting that this rhetoric can start and keep going and grow legs.
I actually think that Italy's economy may help us in this front, in the sense that I do not think that we will ever be, maybe hopefully at some point, but not in the next few years, in the financial position to be providing for Europe and not be getting anything in return.
I think we learned a lot from the UK experience. And I think actually people talking about this was way more before the Brexit. And after we've seen effects and how bad it's going, and I think this is quite dying in Italy, because if UK is not sustaining it, we will collapse the day after. And this was already the expert idea before, because UK didn't have this debt, didn't have all these problems, didn't have these poverty levels. And they were trying to say this. Now people also saw it with their eyes. So I think this is not very debated at the moment. But we will see, we never know at this point.
Reaching the point of not knowing anymore and not providing any more answers because we're just unsure, I would like to thank all of you for coming to our podcast and sharing your opinions and ideas. I genuinely think this was super insightful. A lot of the stuff I haven't heard before, also your personal opinions. So thank you so much for bringing us a bit closer to Italy in this sense. And please listen to our episode when it's out.
Of course, thank you so much for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
Thank you.
To sum up what we covered today, populism has a long history in Europe and in Italy. Thus, in order to understand the current political climate, it is essential to take note of this and see what social indicators connote an influx of populism.
Over the past 50 years, the EU has seen a trend of increasing the rights and protection of marginalized groups such as immigrants, ethnic minorities, women, religious minorities, and the LGBTQ+ community.
However, like all trends, things can change. And as we see a comeback of populist policies and ideas, we as young people who live in the European Union must ensure that we are the bastion of rights for the next generation.
Once again, we want to thank our guests Enrico, Edoardo, and Mic for providing us with their insights. And of course, we want to thank you, the listeners, for tuning back in with us. We hope you enjoyed the second episode, and of course, we also hope to see you back for the next time at Dura Lex Zed Lex.